The U.S. has sought to test China's resolve in the South China Sea. Here's what you need to know. A U.S. Navy aircraft carrier strike group and a destroyer operated in the South China Sea on Wednesday, days after China introduced a law requiring foreign vessels to give notice before entering waters it claims as its own. Guided missile destroyer USS Benfold traveled within 12 nautical miles of Mischief Reef in the Spratly Islands, according to a U.S. Navy press release Wednesday, and the USS Carl Vinson, along with its strike group, also trained in the same region. According to Stars and Stripes, the USS Carl Vinson carries F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters and CMV-22B Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft, and a spokesperson said it held maritime strike exercises and coordinated training between surface and air units on Monday. Chinese state mouthpiece, the Global Times, said China had responded to the USS Benfold by conducting whole process tracking and monitoring to warn it off, utilizing the naval and aerial forces of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. The U.S. Navy said its operation was lawful and reflected its intention to uphold freedom of navigation, while a statement from a PLA spokesperson said it was proof the U.S. is the biggest risk and peace breaker for the stability and peace in the region, according to the Global Times. China added that it has indisputable sovereignty over the Spratly Islands, in keeping with its self-declared 9-line boundary, which stretches hundreds of miles south and east from its most southerly province of Hainan, according to the BBC. Stars and Stripes notes that, as part of the sovereignty claim, China has reclaimed land and built military infrastructure in the Spratlys since 2014, with the Council on Foreign Relations website explaining that construction involved ports, military installations, and airstrips on islands in the Spratlys and Paracels. It says Woody Island, in particular, has been militarized through the deployment of fighter jets, cruise missiles, and a radar system. However, a number of countries have laid claim to the islands and various zones in the South China Sea since the 1970s, owing to its rich natural resources and fishing areas, and sovereignty is hotly contested, with a 2016 Hague tribunal ruling that China's claims of historic rights within the 9-line were without legal foundation. That ruling has by no means lowered tensions in the region, with acts of perceived aggression from China building up. This April, for instance, CNN reported analysts called out a secret Chinese maritime militia for being aggressive in its efforts to push the fishing fleets of other Asian nations out of the South China Sea. China denied that the militia existed, but Western analysts said study of these fishing boats showed that they formed an integral part of China's military actions. The boats are often huge by fishing boat standards, but appear not to catch any fish. They have automatic weapons aboard and reinforced hulls, making them dangerous at close range. With top speeds of around 18 to 22 knots, they are also faster than 90% of the world's fishing boats. According to CNN in April, analysts said China has been using these weaponized boats to protect large flotillas of normal Chinese fishing boats. That setup allows China to quickly send hundreds of Chinese fishing boats to any disputed island, a flotilla so large that it can't be challenged without triggering a military confrontation. And in a March demonstration of what these boats can do, more than 200 Chinese fishing boats crowded around Whitsun Beach for weeks, a major fishing ground and part of the Philippines' territorial waters. The response to that kind of pushy behavior from the U.S. has largely come through freedom of navigation incursions like this week's. However, other countries from around the region have also come up with their own responses. The Council on Foreign Relations notes that Japan has sold military ships and equipment to Vietnam and the Philippines to upgrade their maritime security capacity and deter Chinese aggression. But more dramatically, at the end of 2020, the leaders of Japan and Australia reached a preliminary agreement on a bilateral defense pact, according to a statement from Australia's Prime Minister. That agreement allows the countries to train on each other's territory, makes it easier for troops from both sides to share military bases, and streamlines cooperation during military exercises and disaster missions. At the time, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Japanese Premier Yoshihide Suga held in-person talks during which they also agreed to cooperate in tackling climate change. But what's clear is that for Japan, the deal represents a pretty major gesture as its first deal of this kind since the Status of Forces Agreement with the U.S. was signed in 1960. They are, in short, taking China seriously. In a joint statement, Suga and Morrison expressed serious concerns about the situation in the South and East China Seas and strong opposition to militarizing disputed islands and other unilateral attempts to change the status quo without explicitly mentioning China. On top of that, those talks coincided with exercises in the Northern Arabian Sea involving the 4 countries that comprise the Quad: the US, Japan, Australia, and India. The Quad is an informal strategic forum between the 4 countries that is rapidly solidifying into a formidable anti-Chinese bloc. That naval drill, codenamed Malabar, included India's Vikramaditya Naval Carrier Battle Group and the US's Navy Nimitz Strike Group, and frontline warships from Australia and Japan. Beijing has described the Quad as an Asian NATO designed to counter China, and the group already shows signs of expanding. In March 2020, the Quad Plus countries, India, the US, Australia, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Vietnam, held a second round of diplomatic talks focusing on the coronavirus pandemic. The Associated Press reported in June that Japan and Australia were now in the final stages with their defense cooperation deal. In short, these goings-on in the South China Sea are said to be a big story for a very long time. In 2016, an international tribunal in The Hague invalidated China's claims that it owns almost all of the South China Sea. The tribunal also unanimously upheld the Philippines' sovereign rights to disputed reefs and islands close to its shorelines. However, that has not stopped China from using thousands of fishing boats to push Philippine boats away from these contested areas. These occupying Chinese boats are now causing a serious threat to marine life in the region. Here are the details. The Associated Press reports that sewage from hundreds of stationary Chinese boats is causing algae blooms that have damaged coral reefs and threatened fish stocks in an unfolding environmental disaster. Western analysts say the boats are part of a huge Chinese maritime militia that use sheer force of numbers to push other nations out of contested areas in the South China Sea. Satellite images over the last 5 years show how human sewage and wastewater have accumulated around these stationary flotillas, causing damaging algae blooms which are destroying reefs that are vital to the reproduction of fish stocks. Analysts of Similarity Incorporated, a company that specializes in satellite imagery analysis, spoke on Monday, July 12th, at a Philippine online news forum on China's actions in the South China Sea, a sea that China claims to be almost entirely its own. The analyst showed satellite images of at least 236 ships anchored at the Union Banks Atoll on June 17th alone. The images also showed large blooms of algae spreading out around the cluster of ships. The analyst warned that schools of fish, including migratory tuna, breed in the reefs that are being damaged, and the sewage could cause fish stocks to considerably decline in an offshore area that is a key regional food source.
For more news animations and explainers, hit the subscribe and bell button to join the TomoNews family. Thanks for watching.